Welcome to part 2 of Business and Industry. We will continue where we left off in reviewing the deep and oftentimes complex relationship the institutions of business and industry has on our personal lives, as well as the nation itself and our financial and business world. We asked an important, if not central question in part 1. Does anyone ever pull back the covers to find out the causal reasons for the persisting cultural decay in our institutions of business and industry? Why does this stuff happen? What drives it? How are these deviant behaviors learned, and why do they persist? Well, someone has recently peeled back the cover on the very subject, helping us to have a better insight into what's happening in our business world and perhaps why. Duff McDonald, a successful business journalist and author, has just released a book, The Golden Passport. In the book, he boldly criticizes a revered house of education, the Harvard Business School. McDonald unabashedly spells out how Harvard, amongst its peers, has taught its graduates over many years to promote money and greed over values and human morals. McDonald reveals how the Harvard Business School over several decades has created cadres of elite MBA graduates who have gone on to run the majority of companies in America's most premier business and industries. These Harvard MBA graduates go on to directly lead the boardrooms and direction of many companies across all industries, and in doing so, they have defined to a large extent a form of national and world capitalism in their image and according to the tenor of their principles, or as some might say, the lack of. Delimited by tenets of their Harvard business education and some of its professors, Harvard produces a business purpose and culture, which is inward-looking and void of social responsibility to ordinary people, communities, and the nation. This reminds me of something I've heard before. As Theodore Roosevelt warned us a century ago, to educate a person in mind and not in morals is to educate a menace to society. And apparently, Harvard appears to have achieved just that, menaces among us. McDonald's conclusion is that the Harvard Business School has abysmally failed the goal of its founders, who great-heartedly sought the multiplication of men who will handle their current business problems in socially constructive ways. While the Harvard Business School graduates tends to be very good at whatever they do, McDonald claims, that is rarely the doing of good. John A. Byrne of Poets and Quants, in a recent book review and commentary, summed it up nicely. He says the Harvard Business School is an institution that promotes money, greed, and immorality above society's needs. He continues, it's a school whose teachings are complicit in the moral failings of Western capitalism. That's a pretty damning indictment. To sum up what we can learn from the observation in McDonald's book, The Golden Passport, I would say this. The book provides us with a fascinating and courageous critique of a premier academic institution, which has been impacting the quality and tenor of our nation's business leaders for decades. The Golden Passport gives us an interesting answer to our originally posed question. What do we see in our institutions of business and industry as contributing to the persistent lack of genuine human perspective in many people tied to the core of our financial and economic businesses? The Golden Passport highlights a deep cultural divide among Harvard's business school graduates and American society, a division between an education which encourages self-interest in profits and personal conquests over noble values of community and national purpose, an education which divorces graduates from moral grounding in their strategic and tactical decision-making, urging instead to think about money and gain, rather than human beings and their well-being. To Harvard, it's simply a numbers game, driven by impersonal spreadsheets and share value. In an important way, McDonald has hit on a resonating characterization of the soul and nature of capitalism, and it begs the question as to whether the tenets defining capitalism will ever be reconcilable with the heart and inspirations of humankind. If our premier business educators at Harvard and elsewhere fail to educate on moral responsibility as an integral aspect of the successful business candidate, along with the essential skills in finance, management, technology, competitiveness, and critical thinking, then Theodore Roosevelt's admonition of menaces to society will be realized even more demonstrably in the years ahead. Let's step away from Harvard and the impact of education and look at the framework in which our business and industrial institutions operate within. Let us be reminded capitalism and free market economies underpin our national economy and the pursuit of personal and national financial well-being. Capitalism and free market economies also underpin our nation's democracy and freedoms we enjoy and prosper under. As an engine of prosperity for America, we are energized to provide leadership and help across the world, providing guidance and support to nations seeking constitutional democracies and human rights. In the primary institution of business and industry, there are three major forms of social and economic structures, or frameworks, so to speak: capitalism, socialism, and communism. Capitalism, which requires a free market system where the market is freer in direct correlation to less government control and regulation. The more free the market, the more liberty given to the enterprise in that market, most often found in democracies, and a free market economy is viewed by the majority of people in the world as the best base for the future of their economy and their aligning form of ideological government. And not unexpectedly do we find capitalism fueling growth and political stabilization throughout the majority of countries, especially in North America and Western Europe. Even socialist and communist countries have adapted main elements of capitalism into their government-controlled economies, especially with concepts like private ownership of land, homes, and small businesses. However, due to the growing divergence between those who have and those who have not, between the rich and powerful and the poor, due to more wealth moving into the hands of the 1% and out of the hands of the 99%, capitalism has been coming under siege. On Wall Street and elsewhere in America, the young and the old, genuine and legitimate protesters, along with anarchists and loons, have taken to the streets to register their protest and grievance towards the insensitivity of capitalism and the economic harm it's doing to people's lives. Harvard Business Review and other business journals have put forth remedial actions which can aid in making capitalism more balanced and productive for greater segments of society, which is both a necessary and worthwhile pursuit, for there is no other alternative, major economic system which can ensure a more successful result. In rounding out our discussion on the primary institution of business and industry in contemporary culture, we would be remiss in not mentioning a very key issue scraping and scratching its way along the underbelly of our financial and business world. Here in America and multinationally, the issue is like a leech, sucking out vitality while it feeds, leaving toxins into the healthy host. We are, of course, speaking about organized crime. By some estimates, drawing in worldwide over $128 billion a year. Some would say you could easily double that number if the story were to be told. In any event, it's huge and pervasive. And the crime families and syndicates, the cartels and transnational gangs are a multitude. They are rich, powerful, and vicious, infiltrating businesses, banks, courthouses, prisons, and legitimate industries, both large and small, stealing, smuggling, destroying, killing, and growing their empires at our expense, and wrapping filthy hands around our economy and people engaged in it. We mention organized crime because it is a factor to be considered in our contemporary view of business culture. It is a very serious threat as it grows ever larger in its presence and reach. Over the past few decades, it has metastasized from several regional mafia families around the world into transnational drug cartels, paramilitary groups, organized gang syndicates, sophisticated cyber criminals, frankly, into every conceivable illicit anti-life activity the world has ever known. And as we look to improve culture in our lives, whatever we can do to aid in the forceful combat of organized crime is both wise and necessary. I'd like to close with a few words Of all the primary institutions we talked about, business and industry is the biggest in scope and therefore warrants a fair share of attention. It's simply massive, continental, and global in reach. Business and industry comprises the lion's share of institutions in contemporary society. In terms of people, human interaction, research, manufacturing, commerce, technology, the sheer scale of human energy, you name it, the interactions and intercourse proliferate across all cultures on a daily basis. Business and industries form the infrastructure of our economy, underlining and driving the impulses of our larger culture. And for these reasons, business and industry is extraordinarily influential in our lives. It greatly influences how we live, how we provide for ourselves and family, what we do and when we do it, the opportunities open to us or those denied. Business and industry is not just influential to itself, but extends to all other primary institutional areas we discuss. It is penetrative and momentous to culture overall. And herein lies a challenge for us. Business and industry is the brick and mortar, the plumbing and electrical, the vertebral skeleton, muscle and blood of our culture. It provides the medium, or matrix if you will, upon which we live our lives through this physical world of ours. In a matter of speaking, business and industry is the most aligned with our physical selves, the physiology, the human body and mind. Bear with me for a moment as I allude to some science to make a point about the challenge I'm raising with regards to business and industry. Let's consider Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You've probably heard about it in school. Starting at the bottom in red, we have the basic and physiological needs, where people first look to fulfill. Then comes safety and security, the orange, followed by love and belonging, the yellow, then self-esteem, the green. Eventually, we get to self-actualization, the purple. And the theory goes simply like this. A human being moves upward, confidently satisfying their needs through each level, one at a time before going on to the next one. So you start here, and if all goes well, you develop to here. The human mind and body doesn't skip a level, but in their lifetime, hopefully, they progress successfully through all the levels. Notice where morality is located. This is the level of spiritual development where people develop their faith and deepen their understanding of the values within. That's right, all the way at the very top. Now, of course, it's quite unusual for the average person to get there without having first worked their way up through the levels. So it's very important for a person to successfully satisfy and achieve realization of their basic and security needs in order to get real, confident start in life. Unfortunately, many people live their entire lives entrapped in the lower levels. There could be many reasons holding them there: lack of opportunity, no job, poverty, mental illness, lack of education, addictive dependencies, violence, sexuality issues, conflict. Until these physiological and safety concerns are met and overcome, there the people stay, and they may never break free to realize the true fullness of their lives, and more importantly, the real purpose of their being. And it is here at these levels where the institutions of business and industry are most aligned to the physical aspect of our lives, essentially integral to us as we pursue achieving these basic needs. And this is the challenge we face. For the people in a culture to progress, basic needs have to be provided for. As many a counselor can tell you, it's difficult to talk to people about God and morals and the next life when their belly is empty, where they have no job or home or resources. Their minds are not on abstract thoughts or the next life. They are thinking of survival now, first and foremost. They aren't going to think about next week until they can be sure they are going to make it through today. It's reasonable and accurate to conclude relative morality is noisily, if not destructively, expressing itself in our contemporary business world. It has become embedded in the business culture as a constant. creating an underlying presence of instability and potential corruption in the minds and boardrooms of our most esteemed and trusted business leaders. The very people larger humanity depends upon for creating and running the massive infrastructure through which the general populace can meet their physiological and basic needs. And within the minds and motivations of industry captains, the leadership in boardrooms, executives, and managers directing Wall Street, we fully realize the destructive influence of relative morality as active, pervasive, and toxic. We've learned how genuine morality is stillborn in our academic and business institutions, as we find the business professors who are instructing our past and future business leaders encourage greed and ignore moral responsibility in their teaching. Creating relationships which can engender confliction, a confliction between the separation of rightful business conduct from wrongful and exploitive mindsets. As Theodore Roosevelt accurately predicted, creating menaces among us. A major consequence of this confliction is its nature to undermine all the good that free markets, free enterprise systems can do in the world, especially in supporting and sustaining democratic freedoms and constitutional democracies across the continents. We further conclude and emphasize it is truly unfortunate there are some business leaders who are amoral in every measure, putting their self-interest ahead of the workers and public good. Instead of leading with foundational values, they act with anti-values to attain personal gain at the expense of others. This we recognize as a given. The weeds will always sprout. And we see these weeds as the greedy souls they are, fundamentally choking out the life for the many in humanity, entrapping them in lives of despair and confusion, entrapping them in an endless loop of pursuing basic needs, denying them an opportunity to rise up and fulfill their lives. So we can close out this section with a couple of very important thoughts. As a society, we must make every effort we can to help ensure our business and industry leaders are both of sound mind and equally imbued with guidance from a foundation of noble and moral principles. Principles tied to the greater good of humanity and not the avarice of wild capitalism. And as a culture, we hold business leadership accountable through transparency of conduct, regulations, and balanced educations, as their role and contribution to the prevailing culture and people is fundamentally enabling to all and not perversely for the few. Our next presentation in our Awaken 25 video series continues with our assessment of contemporary society, where we will review the primary institutions of social and leadership and their respective influences upon our culture. Please go to video 6D.